Hello, I'm joined by Dr. Adrienne McKenna, who has written nearly half of her doctoral thesis on this painting that Manchester Art Gallery have been lucky enough to acquire in 2024. And together we're going to look at some details of the painting and its context, and its structure. So I wonder, shall we start with perhaps the title of your thesis, Adrienne, which I think is on a poster on the wall?
Well, yeah, this actually is a fascinating picture. It has so many tiny details that unless you're introduced to them, they might easily pass you by. And in fact, when we came in today, and it's the first time I've ever seen this picture, I noticed that there was a little sort of poster up on this structure that you might see here that is a wall. And actually, Florence Claxton, who painted this in 1861, did produce a catalogue explanation of her painting, and she described this wall as the ancient wall of custom and prejudice. And from what we've just been able to make out of this poster here that seems to be up, it does refer to this wall being the wall of custom and prejudice, and that no one should go about defacing it or destroying it in any way. Custom and prejudice was actually the title of my thesis, because I was looking at the ways in which women trying to forge professional careers in the mid-Victorian period were held back by custom, which was basically the ideas that Victorians had about polite behaviour, and prejudice, which was the very real operation of sexism that held back women from progressing in their careers at that period.
Oh, brilliant. Well, maybe we should, before plunging into some of the details, have a look at the overall structure. And I've read a bit of your thesis, the part relating to the picture anyway. So, Adrienne, could you tell me who Barbara Bodichon was and why she was important to the structure of this picture?
That's a really good question. And Barbara Bodichon was herself an artist, actually. She was a landscape artist. But I think she's most well known, well, she was known at the time as being an artist, but equally, but perhaps eclipsed by her activism, because she was working very hard, and she put her money into projects that would advance the rights of women. And she had all sorts of different projects on the go, and she was very generous. One of the projects she had was this English Women's Journal. And she did, it wasn't her own project, there was lots of other women that worked with her on the project. But what you can see as her as an editor, and in some of her writings and in the journal, is the journal has a very trying, and it's probably part of their ethos to educate the public, the reading public, is that they had quite a rational way of looking at subjects. They were trying to encourage women to think for themselves, just as the golden figure in the business.
To overcome that idea that women could only have airy nothings.
Airy nothings, yes.
And Journal for Women was particularly well structured, encourage you to think for yourself.
To think for yourself. That's just it exactly, because many people in society, and it wasn't just men, would say women are instinctive, and emotional. So the journal often would take an issue, a problem in society, and it would dissect it, and then it would offer a solution.
So using lots of statistics and
yes.
and overviews and
yes, it would.
Masculine, in inverted commas,
yes.
ways of looking at things.
Yes, and in fact, it's precisely that the journal would take. And so I think that has an application in the painting, because you can also see in the groupings, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. In these groupings of people, you can see an issue and a solution, an issue and a solution, an issue and its solution. Many people have tried to understand what's going on in this picture, and they've often done, very recently, there was a scholarly paper published which did a good job of linking the individual people you see in the picture to contemporary ideas of things that were going on in the mid-Victorian period. For example, and I'll just take this as one example, the fact that the governesses in the Victorian era was an oversaturated market. And so you see 3 governesses crowded around one little child. What people have struggled with doing is explaining why there's so many people in this picture and why are they arranged in these, because they do seem to be groupings. If I say a grouping here, grouping, maybe related to this picture, and a grouping here. And when I was reading to try and get into the painting and understand what was going on, because it is actually an allegory, and that is, it's a painting trying to make a point about the society in which it was created. And to get into that, you have to recover some of the ideas of what was going on at that time, what people were thinking about. So you really have to go to journals, to newspapers, to people's letters. And I kept finding myself being drawn back over and over again to this one journal, the English Women's Journal, that married up in outlook towards a subject with the way it's represented in the picture. So just again to return to the idea of the governesses, in Victorian society there was a great deal of sympathy for the fact that governesses were having such a very hard time of it. And when you see pictures like Robert Redgrave's The Governess, in order to get the public on board and being sympathetic, they were represented as young, as beautiful, slim, and alienated within the environment in which they were found. In contrast, and this is a recurring theme in Claxton's painting, Claxton comes up with a very original way of representing them. And they are somewhat problematic because they're overbearing, they're really not sympathetic. And at their feet is a book that, if you could read the writing, tiny writing, says, it says in French, the basics, all the subjects. And actually, they've let that fall at their feet when it's the very article they should have in their hands. They need to be aware of the basics to teach properly. They've let it drop.
So that's the problem, or the issue?
No, that's a good point, actually. If I could address the issue and the problem, the solution, the second to the point that the English Women's Journal was unique, somewhat unique, in saying, something, the governesses have to have a hand in this problem themselves. They're entering a market that's crowded, and they're not always prepared for the job they take on. And that's why, in this picture, Claxton shows the book that would equip them with their professional learning has fallen at their feet. So in this sense, Barbara Boudichenot and the English Women's Journal are in harness in seeing it as something, as a problem. But the issue and solution that I refer to, which was one that was adopted by the English Women's Journal, which was encouraging middle class women to think for themselves, it tried to be very rational and educate its readers, and it would talk about an issue like the overwhelmed governess market, and it would talk about the solution of immigration. And I saw this as a way to interpret the painting as a number of issues: the issue of an overcrowded governess market, the solution of immigration, issue of an excessive devotion to the duties of domestic life, and the solution in educating yourself. If you see the woman holds a book in her hand and she's informing herself so that she doesn't have to listen to a hectoring lawyer or a dominant cleric. And then finally, a grouping of a woman who's fallen in very hard times, shall we say, and some artists that are striving to create a career for themselves. But if I could return to the issue of the governesses and immigration, this is where I think I could try and convince someone that the English Women's Journal was related to this painting, because governesses were caught in an economic trap, an economic and social and cultural trap, because their society thought that they were gentlewomen, and the only way to get to emigrate, if you didn't have any money, and the governesses didn't, because there was too many women chasing one job, the wages were driven down. The only way you could get abroad was as a servant, and even the English Women's Journal agreed no governess would agree to go on board an emigrant ship as a servant. And what the English Women's Journal said is, you know what we should do? We should create a fund for governesses to emigrate, because it recognised their status as gentlewomen and the solution of emigration, but it met it halfway in saying we create a fund for them so they don't have to reduce themselves.
That's fantastic. I mean, I feel like already the painting is becoming clearer to me now that I understand that it isn't just some groups of people all engaged in just one giant topic of women's work. It's here's a particular issue, here's a potential solution.
Yes.
I mean, I don't know if you want to carry on in this vein and perhaps talk us through the central part of the picture.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, maybe we should read some of the words out loud, because the writing is so tiny.
Yes, you can't make it out.
Do you want to say what's underneath that golden cup in the middle? Shall I put my nose up to it?
Yeah.
The proper study of womankind is man! Exclamation mark.
Well, this is actually a reworking, and it's an indication actually of how clever Florence Claxton was, because she was a very young woman when she produced this painting. She was 22. But what she's done here is she's reworked a saying by Alexander Pope that went back to 1734, and I think it might have been called the Epistles of Man, but anyway, it said, the proper study of man is mankind. And it doesn't have an exclamation mark. And
I didn't imagine that, did I? There is an exclamation.
There is an exclamation mark. And I think the exclamation mark is actually a sly joke. And it's like, if you know the expression, there's no zealot like a convert. And what she's really ramming home the point that contemporary society really thought that women ought to be worshipping men.
And they are doing it,
and
aren't they?
They are doing it, because there is a baby in the background. It's infancy. This is considered a man at the height of his attractiveness.
Oh my God, even with those sideburns.
Yeah,
they're not supposed to be seriously attractive though,
no,
are they?
but they were. They were supposed to be. These are the height of fashion. And these are the height of fashion, and this is youth, and this is what she's done again, is she's inverted again, because I think if we look at it close up, seeing up the nostrils of a young man is just not lovely. It's unlovely. And this is middle age, and he has a number of women waiting on him, and he's prodding at his nail. And I think the old age, you have a man in a skull cap that has a hammer. And it's very difficult to understand what this is, but I think it's a representation of senility. Because the women that surround him don't seem to be nervous about his hammer. But what it's saying actually is the worship, women should be worshipping at the altar of man. But here is part of the joke, is that the saying is underneath a golden calf, which in biblical terms was encouraging people to think the Israelites false worship of the golden calf.
Oh, we've got a picture of that scene. Yeah, round the gallery there, worshipping the golden calf.
Well, that's what it is, and so the painting is kind of saying all this worship of man, all these women dancing on the needs of man, is a false worship. And actually, just to return to the English Women's Journal, Barbara Buddhishaw herself said, don't make man your God. And the journal said, don't invest everything in it would be wonderful to get married, but in the meantime, do other things with your life, become informed, take an interest in your own life.
And I noticed the calf has got those roses.
Oh yeah, that's actually, this is, so my doctorate was one that drew on literature as well. I mean, any resource that was going to help me to...
But of course you need the context for the
Context.
society, right?
So Anthony Trollope's novels, and there is a very popular one called A Small House in Allington that was mentioned in Desert Island Discs once. The Small House at Allington says that when one of the characters is about to get married, he feels rather like a calf beribboned, and he's about to be sacrificed at the altar. And this actually, it occurs in another novel of Trollope's, also called Rachel Riley. But it's a reference to the fact that the period of courtship was a shared one, but once they were engaged, it was very much, the woman was in, before the marriage, the woman was in an ascendancy. The woman had the upper hand, and the man was there to be paraded, maybe even mocked slightly. But the wreaths also were a thing that young women would make for themselves. They were associated with weddings, we know that from books also, but also, dances and bridal wreaths. This young woman has a wreath round her head. So it's related to marriage, courtship, and actually this idea of men maybe perhaps being placed in a difficult position in an engagement.
So women's work to worship a man didn't necessarily lead to any joy for the man, because the man feels like a calf being led to the altar for sacrifice. Yes. Anyway. I suppose she's saying it's like a structural problem,
yes,
rather than something that any individual is doing. We're all suffering,
yes,
from women's work being considered like this.
Yes,
that's not what I thought you were going to say. When I noticed there were roses, I thought that would lead you up to the figure on top of the ladder, because roses and calves. I thought,
oh yes,
I thought that's where you were going to go with that. So you brought a whole new dimension.
Well, yeah, that is a good point, because it might be a play on the word Rosa. Yes, because the catalogue explanation that went with this, in the catalogue explanation that accompanied this, we can't be certain that Florence Claxton wrote it, but I think almost certainly she did. But she says that the artist sitting on top of the wall is Rosa B, and then there's an underscore. And this was a convention from the period where you didn't name someone specifically, a person in public life. And everyone that's looked at it has thought, well, yeah, that's got to be Rosa Bonheur, because Rosa Bonheur was at the very height of her powers. I mean, there wasn't a global art market, but certainly in England and in France and across an educated world market for art, Rosa Bonheur was actually at the very top of her game.
British at the top of the career ladder, right?
She's top of the career ladder. This is actually, as a symbolic representation, it's accurate, but as a portrait, it's inaccurate. Because when this painting was created, Rosa Bonheur was 38, and for Victorian society, that was way over the hill. That was middle-aged.
Okay.
And Rosa Bonheur's image was actually really quite well known to the British public, because they had been fascinated by her paintings. They'd gone on tours around the country, and I know from newspapers right across the UK, her painting went out and it was accompanied by a portrait. And I think, I have to speculate here, no one says it explicitly, but I think people were fascinated by the idea that a woman could produce these massive canvases at the time, because women typically restricted themselves to small works. That was the limit of their ambition. Rosa Bonheur was producing massive works of animals. And so they were familiar with her image that she was actually not in the first flush of youth, that she wore her hair in a centre parting. And the most infamous fact about Rosa Bonheur that sort of scandalised society was that she cross-dressed. And she cross-dressed, she felt, because it was easier to work like that, and because she went up ladders, she did literally go up ladders.
I see.
She
Yeah.
did.
That would be easier in a ladder.
In trousers.
In trousers to go up a ladder, yeah.
A ladder. So actually, for the British society who knew Rosa Bonheur, the idea of her, and this woman's young, her hair's tied back, it doesn't seem to be short, she's wearing a fashionable hat. Rosa Bonheur wore what was called a wide-awake hat. It had a huge brim, it was tatty, and she wore trousers, and this is an image of demure femininity, and it's set in an English pastoral environment. And while the British public respected Rosa Bonheur, there were strong national feelings at the time. She was a French woman. So this is really part of a joke on Florence Claxton's part, because she produced a painting that she really wanted to sell. She had to sell it. She wasn't wealthy. This painting probably took her quite a time to produce. It was only her only work in the prestigious medium of oils.
So this was literally her only oil painting?
Yes.
That's something I wanted to clear up, whether it was her only surviving one. It was just her only one.
Yes. Yes.
Sorry, interrupting. Go back to Rosa Bonheur.
And the joke was she was kind of representing, she wanted to sell it, but she was representing a very zeitgeist topic, women's work, which while people were all talking about it, I'm not sure anyone wanted to hang it in the lounge. Because the dominant, moneyed, patriarchal, not overwhelmingly, because women did buy paintings, but it was predominantly men. While they were listening to the subject of women's work, and women were saying, we need to work, there's lots of reasons why they needed to work, it wasn't a particular popular topic, although it was on everyone's lips. And so, in producing this picture, she has to make it operate at several levels, so she can appeal to all different kinds of markets. And I think in the figure of Rosa Bonheur, she's making a little bit of a joke. This operates at all different kinds of levels, this figure, because actually an English woman at this moment can't sit on top of the wall because the Royal Academy won't permit it.
Oh, so they can't overcome the wall of custom and prejudice.
Yes, precisely. In fact, at this time, they had only just let in the very first students to study in their schools after a huge, long campaign that Florence participated, and so did Barbara. But the last bit, maybe, of the joke is that Rosa Bonheur's favourite animal were bulls. And she said, the only male thing that I really like are bulls. And the calf that's here, obviously, the infant of a bull, this figure has turned away from it, and it's an element of, well, Rosa would turn towards the bull, but this symbolising patriarchy, it's complex. She's looking away from her favourite animal. So it's kind of like, could that be Rosa?
All the best jokes are complex though, right?
They are.
Yeah.
They are. And therefore, the Victorian public did actually like to interrogate their paintings. If you think of William Powell Firth's The Railway,
or Derby Day. We have a version of Derby Day in our collection. It's not on display at the moment, sadly, but yes, to be able to read it makes you feel clever.
Yes. And they did actually look at tiny details, and they enjoyed that sense of teasing out the narrative that was going on here. So yes, that's also going on here, that there is a narrative.
Did Claxton know Barbara Bodichon or just her work? Was she so famous that everyone knew her in Claxton's world, or did they have any personal connection? You see, it's because I'm an instinctive woman. I'm talking about the personal. I have to edit that bit out.
That's a really interesting question, and I tried so hard in the research for my thesis to find if there was ever any register of the English Women's Journal's library attendance, because they created a library of their back copies. And women like Florence Claxton could come and look at their journals. And men had so many clubs that they could go to, and this was the very beginning of clubs for women.
Oh, I see. So I mean, I'm not saying that it matters that they met or not, because the English Women's Journal had this distinctive way of looking at a problem and explaining it clearly and saying this might be a possible solution, and it was well known in the world. But I mean, you don't have to have met the editor.
You don't have to met the editor. No, but there was actually, as I was doing my research for my thesis, I came across a very interesting comment about the journal, and it was that another scholar said the journal didn't just want people to be educated, it wanted them to go on and take action. And I think this is actually quite a key point, because Florence Claxton lived 3 miles away from this library, and the last line of my thesis in that section postulates that this was her form of action on the basis of reading the journal, that she was taking a proto-feminist action in putting forward to the world just how constrained the world of women's work was, how limited the options were, the tragedy that was in it, because there is tragedy in this picture, in several figures, and how it restricted and made sad, basically, the lives of so many women. In a way, Barbara Bourdichon and Florence Claxton did meet, but they met on a piece of paper. And it was this petition to the Royal Academy, please allow women to study there. There was free study there, and they wanted to take advantage of that, because, as you say, the Royal Academy was the arbitrator of taste at that time, and that it could make or break an artist's career to get into this institution. And the first step on that ladder to success, because it was virtually a ladder, was to become a student there. And there was a number of progressive steps until you became an extraordinarily famous and extraordinarily wealthy male academician. And so in 1858, both Bourdichon and Florence Claxton recognised the significance of getting into the schools as a first step to creating a really promising, lucrative career in art and being respected and well known.
Well, I do think I'm a little on shaky ground here, but I'd love to discuss with you to help me out, because this is what people are going to want me to say when we launch the picture next week, is how it relates to women today. Because we're all about that at Manchester Art Gallery. We're all about not seeing art as back in its own time only. Yes, you do need the context to get the jokes, but actually, today, does it have any relevance to women's work today?
I do think so, because while things have improved, even I can see that in my generation, when a woman risks getting on the top of a rock wall like this, she does still have dark clouds around her. She's not sitting in the sunshine as some other genders might be. She is surrounded by dark clouds, and there is the risk, and it's made quite explicit in this painting, that by rising, you have the risk of falling. And goodness, this is a long fall in this painting, because this is the fall from respectability to being shunned by society. But I would say actually that in our society, when women do attempt to put themselves on the parapet, that there is this risk of their moral reputation, and what in social media today they would go after. And after all, paintings to the Victorians were Twitter and X. Today, the risk they have is actually to their moral reputation. And this is actually the way in which women are often attacked nowadays, is by shaming in some way. And quite often it's about the moral reputation. So that's what I would say. Just picking that out, I think if you give me more time, I might think of others, but that's the one that
I want to talk about it, because I've never noticed that the figure that's climbed to the top of the ladder is in the area of dark clouds.
Yeah.
for that. That's really because I do have a feeling in the funding applications I made up something about it's relevant to social media because these people are polishing. This woman in particular is polishing herself up and becoming sort of introspective in a way that young women are very prone to now. They're sitting in their bedrooms alone with their social media, just in a mirror looking at themselves, and the whole thing is very dangerous, and it'll end it, it's a golden calf that you shouldn't be doing that kind of thing. But I think the idea that the most important part of the picture isn't necessarily the centre, but it's the woman getting to the top of the parapet, and that's the message we take out for today.
Yes.
I love that. Thank you for that.
You're welcome.